If you've ever poured drinks for a living, you'll know that bartenders see things, desperate things, broken things, things that crawl out of the dark corners of the human soul and take a seat at the far end of the bar just to bleed their stories into a shot glass. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what I experienced as a bartender at a place deep in northern Idaho called the Hollow Eye, a place so old the floorboards wept whiskey and the walls whispered things when no one was talking. A place where the air smelled like stale fog, and the shadows didn't always match the shape of the things that cast them, where regulars weren't always human, and sometimes when you blinked, their faces would be different when your eyes opened again. A place where you quickly realized you weren't there to serve drinks. You were there to survive. And the drinks were just a ritual to keep the real horror at bay. If you're wondering what happened to me there, why I left that bar with permanent tremors in my hands, and a voice that sometimes stutters in the middle of prayers, or why I can't sleep without bolting upright at night when the floor creaks just the wrong way. If you're curious to know why I won't speak the name of the Hollow Eye unless I'm certain I'm not alone, then you'll have to stay with me until the very end, because it's not just a story, it's a warning. And until you know the 5 rules they made me follow, rules etched in terror and written in the kind of fear that seeps under your skin and never leaves, you won't understand why I still wake up hearing voices from a bar that's hundreds of miles away. When I first arrived at the Hollow Eye, I thought it was just a rundown watering hole like 1,000 others, nestled off a frost-bitten highway, far from town's GPS signals or logic. The kind of place that didn't need a sign out front because the people who were meant to find it always did, and those who weren't never came close. I was desperate for work, and the old man who hired me never told me his name, only handed me a worn leather apron with faded blood-colored stains, and led me behind the bar without ever smiling. He didn't talk much, but after showing me how to work the ancient taps, how to keep the shelves stocked, and how to avoid eye contact with the booth in the far left corner, he finally handed me a yellowed piece of paper with the corners singed and edges curled like something that had been rescued from a fire. He told me in a voice that rattled like something hollow inside his chest, "Read these rules out loud, and if you can't follow them, leave now. If you stay forever." I read them, and as I did, something in the air changed, like the pressure dropped or the oxygen thickened, and I realized these weren't just rules, they were something darker, older, the kind of commandments you'd find carved into stone buried beneath cursed soil, written in a language too terrifying to translate, but somehow understood by every bone in your body. He called them the 5 rules for living through the night, and I'll never forget them. Not because I memorized them, but because they tattooed themselves onto my memory like scars made of smoke and fear. Rule 1, never, under any circumstance, and no matter how hard they beg, pour a drink for someone sitting at the 4th stool from the left. The stool is always empty. If you see someone there, they're not supposed to be seen, and what they want is not alcohol. If you pour a drink, you'll be pouring your soul, and they don't give it back. Rule 2, if the jukebox starts playing by itself, and the song is one you've never heard but somehow know all the words to, you must immediately stop what you're doing, step into the back storage room, close the door, and wait. You'll hear things, scraping, whispering, sobbing, but no matter what you hear, don't open the door until the music stops. If you open the door too soon, it won't be the bar on the other side anymore. Rule 3, every night, precisely once, someone wearing a black trench coat and a wide-brimmed hat will walk in and sit at the bar. You will feel the temperature drop. You will not look at their face. You will not ask them what they want. You will place a glass of still water in front of them and then step back exactly 3 steps. They will drink. They will leave. If you speak to them, or worse, touch them, the next shift will be yours forever. Rule 4, sometimes a little girl with wet hair and muddy feet will enter through the front door. She won't speak. She'll look around like she's lost. Do not speak to her. Do not offer her a seat. Do not, under any circumstances, offer her a drink, not even water. If you acknowledge her in any way, she will sit down and start crying, and when she cries, everyone else in the bar will cry too. And some of them will never stop. Rule 5. If you ever notice a second mirror behind the bar, and you're absolutely certain there's only supposed to be one, you must smash it immediately. Don't hesitate. Don't question it. Don't look into it. The second mirror is not a mirror, and the thing on the other side looks like you, moves like you, smiles like you, but it's been waiting for your eyes to meet. And once they do, only one of you walks away. When I finished reading the rules aloud, I could swear the lights dimmed slightly, like the building itself was exhaling, acknowledging that I had taken something into myself that couldn't be undone. The old man just nodded once, slow and solemn, and walked away without another word, disappearing into a hallway that didn't exist on the building's blueprint. I stood there, alone behind the bar, with the rules shaking in my hand and a sense of dread blooming inside me like mold under skin. The first customer of the night walked in just then, a tall, silent man with glassy eyes who didn't blink the entire time he stared at me. And I realized I wasn't just working a job. I had stepped into a story where the ending was already written in blood, and my only hope was to follow the rules, even as they twisted and bent reality around me like a funhouse mirror filled with screams. And that was just the first night, because as the door groaned shut behind that first customer, and the chill from outside faded into something heavier, thicker, something that clung to the walls like mold made of whispers, I realized that the fear I felt wasn't the sharp spike of panic, but a slow, sinking sensation, like being buried alive in silence. And the deeper I sank into it, the more I understood that the hollow eye wasn't just a bar. It was a place where rules weren't meant to be followed out of obedience, but out of survival. Because if you didn't follow them, the bar didn't just punish you, it unmade you. The man who entered didn't speak, not even when he took the stool second from the right and stared straight ahead like he wasn't looking at me, or the bottles, or the faded mirror with its smoky edges and fingerprints that never wiped off, but at something just beyond my left shoulder, something I dared not turn around to see. And I kept wiping the same already clean glass for longer than was necessary, just to give myself something to focus on. Until I finally asked him, "What'll it be?" And he didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't even breathe in a way that looked normal. He just whispered, voice dry and sharp like broken autumn leaves underfoot, "Nothing yet." And when he smiled, it was with teeth that didn't seem to have the right number, and gums far too dark. I busied myself cleaning, stacking bottles, pretending to check inventory just to give myself distance, because something about him pressed down on my chest like a stone soaking wet with sorrow. But he eventually stood and left as quietly as he had come, and I told myself foolishly that maybe that was the worst it would get. Maybe the place only felt cursed, not actually was, until the clock on the wall skipped backwards once, the second hand jerking left like a broken compass. And I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise up as though an unseen breath had swept across the bar, cold and slow. It was quiet for a while, that painful kind of quiet, where your ears start to ring and you begin to hear things that might not even be there, like the faint clink of ice in a glass that hasn't been filled, or the low murmur of voices from behind the bottles where no mouths could possibly be. And then I noticed something that made my hands stop moving. The glass in my grip suddenly cold as winter, because the fourth stool from the left, the one I had been trained to avoid, the one that must always be empty, now held someone. I didn't see them come in. I didn't hear the door open. But there they were. It was a man, I think. Though the longer I looked, the more difficult it was to remember the shape of his face, or even the clothes he wore, because there was something wrong with the way the light bent around him, as though he was less a person and more a hole in the world, a hollow echo shaped like a human being. And I swear to you, the stool itself trembled beneath him as though it didn't want to hold him either. He looked up at me, and his eyes didn't have whites or pupils or anything that belonged in a person's face. They were like windows into a storm, endless and roiling, and he opened his mouth, impossibly wide, and said, in a voice that didn't sound like it came from him but from under the floor behind the walls inside my own bones, "A whiskey, neat." I didn't move. I couldn't, because Rule 1, that damn cursed Rule 1. My fingers tightened around the rag in my hand until I thought they might break. And still, I didn't speak. didn't acknowledge, didn't pour. Because I knew if I poured it, I wouldn't just be giving him whiskey. I'd be giving him a piece of myself. And what he'd do with it would be worse than death, worse than madness. And when he saw that I wasn't moving, wasn't falling for it, his smile stretched wider, impossibly wide, to the point where I could see the ridges of his skull through the skin of his cheeks. And he said, quieter this time, more disappointed, "Very well. Another night then." He vanished. I don't mean he got up and left. I mean 1 second he was there, the next he wasn't. Like a breath that never happened, like a dream torn apart mid-sentence. And the only sign he'd ever been there was the deep scratch mark on the wood of the fourth stool, a long, curved gouge that hadn't been there before and looked almost like a claw. I backed away slowly, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, when the jukebox clicked to life, even though I hadn't touched it, even though no one else had come in, and the lights dimmed just enough for shadows to stretch across the walls like fingers trying to reach me. And the song it played wasn't on the playlist. It couldn't be, because it was an old lullaby my mother used to hum before she died in her sleep when I was 12, a song that had never been recorded, one that no one but me should have remembered. And yet the tune came out warped and metallic, like it was being dragged through a rusted pipe filled with teeth. That was rule 2. I dropped everything and ran to the back, the storage room cold and reeking of mildew and something metallic, like blood left in a sink for too long, and I slammed the door shut behind me just as the singing turned into screaming. Not human screaming, but layered, twisted, a choir of agony and rage. And I pressed my back to the door, trembling, while something on the other side scraped slow, dragging footsteps across the wood, and a voice, no, several voices, started whispering. Not in English, not in any language I knew, but I still understood what they meant. Open the door. Look, just look. We miss you. I shut my eyes and screamed over them, my hands over my ears, rocking back and forth like a child too afraid to face the thing under the bed. And I don't know how long I stayed like that, but when the music finally stopped, it didn't fade. It cut off mid-note like a noose snapping tight, and the whispers ended instantly. I opened the door slowly. Bar looked the same, mostly, except every bottle behind me had been turned backward. Every stool except the fourth had been pushed away from the bar. And there, in the middle of the bar top, someone or something had written in condensation, "You heard your mother sing." And the writing was still dripping. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, each beat echoing like a drum in the suffocating silence of the bar as I stood frozen in place, staring at the message scrawled across the bar top, the condensation dripping slowly, rhythmically, as if it were alive, taunting me, daring me to do something about it. But what could I do? What should I do? The room seemed to close in on me, the air thick with something cold and bitter, like the taste of old pennies, as I reached out a shaking hand toward the bar top, my fingers barely brushing the liquid when I heard it. A soft thud, then another, then a third, and with each sound, I felt the temperature in the room plummet. My breath came out in sharp clouds, even though the heater had been on all night. The thuds grew louder, closer, until I realized with a jolt that they were coming from the direction of the fourth stool, the one that should have been empty. A low creak of wood beneath the pressure of something or someone, shifting. Then the unmistakable scrape of fabric on fabric, the sound of something moving that wasn't supposed to be able to move. My eyes flickered to the fourth stool, the empty one, only it wasn't empty anymore, not by a long shot. There, seated with eerie calm, was a woman. At least, that's what I thought at first. But as my gaze shifted downward, I saw that her feet were bare, and her legs were covered in long, thin gashes, like something had torn through them. She wore no shoes, and the ground around her was wet, soaking the floorboards, leaving dark, spreading stains. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Her eyes were dark pools of shadow, and they didn't blink. They never blinked. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look away, my pulse thundering in my ears. But when I took my eyes off her, the room didn't seem to stay the same. The music from the jukebox suddenly started again, but it wasn't the same song. No, this time it was the sound of something almost familiar. A lullaby, a nursery rhyme, the one my mother used to hum to me before I went to bed as a child. The voice that sang it wasn't hers. It was deeper, raspy, and hollow. A voice so empty, so broken, I felt like it was tearing me apart from the inside out. I staggered backward, my heart racing, my hands shaking violently at my sides. Why was I hearing this? It was like the walls were pressing in, suffocating me with memories that weren't even mine. But the more I tried to ignore it, the louder the song became, until it was all I could hear, all that filled the space between the clinking of bottles and the faint murmur of voices. I had to get out. I had to escape. But then, as if summoned by my thoughts, the door to the bar swung open with a groan that sent a chill up my spine, and the temperature dropped even further. I glanced over, trying to ignore the chill creeping down my neck, but the figure that entered made my blood run cold, freezing every part of me in place. A man, tall and thin, dressed in a black trench coat and a wide-brimmed hat, his face obscured by shadows, stepped into the bar like he belonged there, like he had every right to be. His presence was so oppressive, so unnatural, that I couldn't help but feel the weight of his gaze on me, even though I didn't dare to look at him directly. It was as if he was an embodiment of the darkness itself, and I could feel my body go rigid with the need to obey every unspoken command, every instinct screaming at me not to engage with him, not to look at him, not to... I caught myself. Rule 3. The third rule. I could hear it ringing in my head, so loud, so clear as I stood frozen, my hands shaking at my sides, because the last thing I wanted to do was violate that rule. I couldn't afford to. None of us could. The bar had a way of exacting its toll when the rules were broken, and the punishment wasn't a mere consequence. It was absolute. It was forever. I did as I had been trained to do. I reached for a glass, filled it with still water, and placed it in front of him, stepping back exactly 3 steps without looking at him, without acknowledging his presence. And for a moment, time seemed to stretch, a long, suspended silence hanging between us as the man, who wasn't a man, not really, sat there, unmoving, the shadows around him deepening, as though they were hungry for something I couldn't understand. He picked up the glass, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw his fingers twist, contort, elongate, but I couldn't look at them. Not now. He drank the water in a single fluid motion, the glass empty in his hands, and then, without a word, he stood up and left, the door swinging shut behind him with a hollow, echoing thud, leaving me alone in the bar again. But as soon as he was gone, the air didn't feel the same. It felt wrong, like something had been altered, like a dark thread had been pulled just slightly out of place, and I couldn't breathe properly anymore. That was when I noticed it. The little girl. She appeared from nowhere, stepping into the bar with quiet, delicate steps, her tiny bare feet making no sound against the cold floorboards as she looked around, her small, wet body clothed in a tattered dress, her wet hair hanging around her face like something pulled from a nightmare. She didn't speak, didn't make a sound, but I could feel her presence growing in the room, thick and suffocating, as her eyes, dark and hollow, scanned the room with the intense, unsettling focus of a child lost in a place they shouldn't be. I should have known better. I should have turned away, ignored her, pretended she wasn't there, but I didn't. Against every instinct, I leaned forward, my voice barely a whisper as I asked, "Can I help you?" The second the words left my lips, I felt the temperature drop again, but this time, it wasn't a chill. It was the feeling of dread, the feeling of being watched by something that wasn't supposed to be there, something that didn't belong, and I saw it, the thing I had been told to never, never acknowledge. She started to cry. At first, it was just a sniffle, soft and delicate, but it quickly grew into full sobs, wails that tore through the air like broken glass, high-pitched and desperate. And the worst part wasn't her crying. No. The worst part was when I looked around the bar and saw that every single person there, every single soul who had been minding their business, sipping their drinks, was now crying too. Their eyes were wide and unblinking, their faces twisted with sorrow, their tears flowing like rivers. Unstoppable, unstoppable. I could hear their whimpers, their muffled cries, each one joining with the next, until it became a cacophony, an orchestra of grief, and I couldn't escape it. The worst part? It wouldn't stop. The wailing, the sobbing, the weeping of every soul in the bar, it was all around me, inescapable, suffocating, as though the air itself had been drained of all warmth and replaced with a cold, empty ache. I tried to focus, tried to make sense of it, but the noise, the relentless crying, seemed to pulse in time with the beat of my heart, each sob deeper, more mournful, until it felt like the very walls of the bar were closing in, each one closing around me, squeezing the breath from my chest. I could feel my own throat tightening, could feel the hot sting of tears behind my eyes, but I couldn't afford to let them fall. Not yet. I needed to remember the rules. Don't acknowledge her. Don't offer her anything. Don't look at the others. But it was impossible. The moment I glanced back toward the girl, her tear-streaked face, her mouth contorted in a silent scream, her hair soaked and clinging to her face, I knew I'd broken the rule. I had made the mistake. I had looked. I had acknowledged her. My heart hammered painfully, louder than the chorus of grief enveloping the room. The girl's eyes, black and void of life, locked onto mine with a hunger that was almost physical, a hollow need, like the void in the sky just before the storm breaks. She stepped toward me, her little muddy feet making no sound on the floor despite the puddles of water that trailed behind her. My breath caught in my throat as her small hand reached out, fingers cold as ice, touching my arm as though it were a lifeline. I didn't move. I couldn't move. And then, as if a switch had been flipped, the crying stopped. All at once, as sudden as it had begun, the sound disappeared. The air grew still, unnervingly still, and I felt the oppressive weight lift, only for something far worse to replace it. The silence was thick and suffocating, as though the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The girl, her eyes never left mine, stood perfectly still, her head tilted slightly to the side, her expression unreadable but somehow knowing, like she had seen far too much for anyone her age to comprehend. It wasn't just her silence that was unsettling. It was the way the room had fallen silent, like everyone had been rendered mute, paralyzed by some unseen force. I could feel the weight of the others' stares on me, their silent judgment, their helplessness, their terror. And the longer I stood there, the more I felt like I was losing something. My grip on reality, perhaps, or my humanity itself. I couldn't tell. And then the door to the bar creaked open once more. I didn't look. I didn't dare. I couldn't. The temperature plummeted again, the cold pressing against my skin like an invisible hand. The door opened wider, and through the corner of my eye, I saw the figure. The tall silhouette dressed in black, the wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face, just as it always did. His presence was somehow more oppressive this time, his footsteps heavy and deliberate as he moved toward the bar. He didn't speak, didn't acknowledge the strange, terrifying scene unfolding before him, as if none of this concerned him in the slightest. I could feel the familiar pull, the instinct to follow the rules, to place the glass of still water in front of him and retreat. But this time, I didn't just feel the pull of the rules. I felt something far worse. I felt the pull of the other presence, the one behind me, the girl. The girl who was still standing there, staring at me with those eyes. Eyes that felt as though they were draining me, stripping me of everything I had left. My heart pounded harder, the beating in my chest louder than the stillness in the room. I couldn't focus. I couldn't think. And as I glanced over at the man in the black coat, I saw that he wasn't sitting down. No, he was standing. He was waiting. Waiting for something. Waiting for me. My hands, slick with sweat, hovered over the counter. I could feel the pull of the glass of water in front of me, calling me, commanding me to pour, to do what I knew I should do. But I couldn't. I couldn't touch it. Not with her standing there. Not with the girl still watching me. The jukebox, seemingly still silent in the corner, buzzed to life once more. The low hum started, growing louder, and the eerie sound of the song began to fill the room. It wasn't a song I knew, not exactly. But somehow I knew the words. The lyrics flowed from my lips involuntarily, the haunting melody wrapping around me like a shroud, curling into my mind, into my very soul. My hands shook as I reached for the bottle in front of me, the whiskey cold against my skin, my pulse quickening as I tried to focus, tried to shake the creeping dread that was crawling over me like a sickness. But it was impossible. The song, the words, the air in the bar, it was all so suffocating, like drowning in a sea of whispers and shadows. The jukebox hummed louder, the glass in front of me trembling in response to the tension building in the air. The girl, the man, the song, the room. It was all closing in. Suddenly, I felt it, the sensation of something moving behind me, a chill crawling down my spine as the air around me thickened. I froze. The girl was no longer in my line of sight. but I knew she was still there, still watching, still waiting. And then the voice that had been calling me, whispering to me from the darkness, spoke again, clearer this time, closer, too close. "You broke the rule," it said, a voice like gravel grinding together, rough and jagged. "And now it's too late. You can't undo it. You can't go back." I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The man in the trench coat stood, his back to me, the shadows of the bar stretching longer, darker. And I knew, deep in my bones, that this time, when the man left, the bar wouldn't be the same. It couldn't be. The temperature dropped further, and I felt the floor beneath me begin to tremble, as if something unseen was pressing against the walls, pushing in, closing every exit, every possible way out. I heard the scratching sound again, faint at first, but then louder, more insistent, like claws scraping against the wood of the bar itself. And that's when I saw it. The mirror behind the bar, the second mirror. It hadn't been there before. It couldn't have been. But now it was there, reflecting not just the bar, but me, my face, my figure, my eyes, and yet it wasn't me looking back. It was something else. Something that had been waiting, watching, and it was smiling. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the reflection in the second mirror. The thing, it wasn't me, not completely. It moved like me, it mirrored my actions, but its smile. That smile twisted my insides into knots. It was wide, too wide, stretching unnaturally across its face, as though it were trying to break free from the confines of its own existence. The more I stared, the more I felt the connection, the weight of its presence, and the unbearable sensation that something was crawling up behind me, something far worse than any reflection could ever be. My body stiffened, every hair on the back of my neck standing on end, and yet I couldn't move, couldn't look away. I heard the scratching again, the sound coming closer, closer to the bar, closer to me. My heart slammed against my chest, every beat a desperate attempt to escape the terror gripping my lungs. Slowly, I turned my head, the air around me thick with an oppressive chill, and there it was. The girl. She was standing right behind me, so close that I could feel the cold radiating from her. But I couldn't bring myself to look down at her, couldn't bring myself to acknowledge her presence again. She was there, her wet hair dripping onto the floor, her small muddy feet barely making a sound as they shifted. I could hear her breathing, soft and shallow, and it sent a chill down my spine, as though I were standing on the edge of a cliff with nothing but darkness beneath me. But I couldn't look at her. I knew the rules. Don't speak to her. Don't acknowledge her. But the longer I resisted, the more unbearable it became, and when I finally did glance toward her, I saw it. Her mouth, slightly open, twitching at the corners as though she was about to say something, but no words came. Only a soft, wet sound like a muffled sob before she opened her mouth wider, and the sound that came from her throat was something beyond comprehension. It wasn't a cry, not exactly. It was a low, guttural sound, a mix of agony and desperation that seemed to reverberate through the walls, shaking the very foundation of the bar. And then the whisper started. It was faint at first, just a barely audible murmur, a voice that seemed to slip in from nowhere, curling around my thoughts like smoke. But as it grew, the whispers became clearer. It was her voice, the girl's voice, and yet it wasn't. It was every voice, the voices of everyone in the bar, blending into one continuous, breathless wail. Don't help me. The words came like a chant, filling the air, swirling around me in a maddening spiral that threatened to pull me under. I stumbled backward, trying to move, trying to breathe, but my body felt frozen, paralyzed by something far worse than fear. I wanted to scream, to shout, to run, but my voice wouldn't come. It was as if the room itself had swallowed it whole. And then the thing in the mirror moved. I felt its gaze, the weight of it on my back, as if the reflection was no longer just a mirror, but a portal, a gateway to something far more terrifying. The thing in the mirror smiled wider, and with that smile, I knew I had crossed a line. It was too late. There was no going back. The bar began to shake violently, the lights flickering above me, casting shadows that twisted and writhed like living things. I looked at the girl again, but this time, her eyes were wide open, wide and unblinking, staring into mine as though she could see right through me. "Don't look at it," a voice rasped from behind me. I whipped around, but there was no one there, no one at all. The voice had come from nowhere, yet it sounded so real, so close. My heart pounded in my ears as I scanned the room, but all I saw was the black trench coat, the man still sitting there, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face, his eyes hidden, his presence suffocating. I had to follow the rules. I had to do something, anything, to make it stop. But no matter where I looked, no matter how much I willed myself to move, it felt like the world had become a stage, a trap, and I was the puppet, the one who had unknowingly walked into a script with no way out. The whispers didn't stop. They crawled over every surface of the bar, sliding between the cracks, crawling under the floorboards, wrapping around my throat like a vice. The temperature in the room dropped so low that I could see my breath, puffing out in white clouds like smoke. Like I wasn't even alive anymore. I could barely feel my limbs, and the longer I stood there, the more I felt my very essence being pulled out of me, as if something was siphoning my soul. It wasn't just the girl anymore. It wasn't just the man in the coat. The bar was alive now. It had changed, and I wasn't sure if it had always been like this, or if it was me that had changed. Maybe this had always been its true form, and I had been too blind to see it, too stupid to understand the rules. Maybe everything had led up to this. I stumbled toward the door, my hands trembling as I reached for the handle. But just as I touched it, I heard the scratching again. But this time, it wasn't just a sound. It was real. I could feel it in my bones, the sensation of claws, sharp, scraping, digging, on the other side of the door. Something was waiting for me outside, something worse than anything inside. I pulled my hand away, my heart racing as I turned toward the bar again, desperate for something to cling to, desperate for a way out. And that's when I saw it, the fourth stool, the empty one. It hadn't been there before. I knew it hadn't been there before. But now, it was, sitting there at the far end of the bar, its back turned to me, like it had always belonged there, waiting for someone to sit in it. But that's not what made my blood run cold. It was the figure sitting in it, the silhouette of someone or something too still, too unnatural to be human. I couldn't see its face, couldn't even tell what it was. But I knew, deep down, that it was looking at me. It was waiting for me to pour that drink, to break the last rule. And suddenly the air was full of voices again, whispers, yells, sobs. And then I heard the worst sound of all, the sound of the jukebox starting up again. I knew what that meant. It was too late. The jukebox, now playing with an eerie, distorted crackle, seemed to fill the entire bar, drowning out the world around me. The song was unlike anything I had ever heard before, but as the first haunting note filled the air, I knew it. Every single word was familiar, like I had heard it 1,000 times in a dream, a song I couldn't remember learning, yet somehow knew by heart. It was like it had been etched into my very soul, deep down in a place I didn't even want to acknowledge. And as the melody twisted into something darker, something unnatural, I felt the room shift again, as if the walls themselves were breathing, tightening around me. The figure at the fourth stool didn't move, but I could feel it watching me, the weight of its stare pressing on my chest. I knew what it wanted, and I knew that if I moved any closer, if I made even the slightest misstep, I would be bound by that final rule, the one that no one ever truly understood until it was too late. The fourth stool was the last place you wanted to be, and the thing sitting there. It wasn't just some twisted apparition. It wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was real. And I was about to make it real for the rest of my life. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But the music, the song, held me in place, wrapped around my thoughts, squeezing until I could barely think straight. My legs felt like laid, my body shaking, my mind screaming for me to remember the rules, to remember that I couldn't give in. I couldn't. Not now. Not when the thing on that stool was waiting for me to make the fatal mistake. The girl's sobbing intensified, filling the space with its horrible wailing rhythm. But it wasn't just her anymore. The cries of every person in the bar had joined in, merging into one incoherent, maddening chorus. The sound a cacophony of pain and loss that made my ears ring and my chest tighten with terror. Their tears, thick and endless, pooled beneath them, seeping into the cracks of the floorboards as if the bar itself was beginning to bleed. I looked at the second mirror again, the reflection not my own, but the twisted version that had been waiting, watching. The thing in the glass grinned wider, its smile stretching, the edges of its mouth curling into a grotesque, inhuman shape. Its eyes were still locked on mine, and I could feel them pulling me in, urging me to come closer, to step into its realm, to let the world collapse and vanish into nothingness. And then, just as the terror was beginning to suffocate me, the man in the black trench coat stood up. His shadow stretched across the room, longer and darker, crawling up the walls like it had a life of its own. He walked toward the door, his steps slow and deliberate, as if he had all the time in the world. I had to move. I had to do something. But my body refused to obey, frozen under the weight of the unspoken rules, the ones I had never questioned until now. The temperature plummeted even further, if that was even possible. I could see my breath, feel it crystallizing in the air, a visible sign that whatever this place had become, it was no longer anything I could understand. I watched as the man opened the door, stepping into the night without a single glance back. The door swung shut behind him with a deafening thud, and for a moment the room fell silent. But that silence, it didn't last. The jukebox crackled again, and this time the song was different. It was slower, lower, more mournful, but it still carried that same deep, bone-chilling familiarity, the same suffocating weight. And then the whispers started, again, louder now. They slithered from the walls, from the floor, from the ceiling, and I could swear that the mirrors, both of them, began to move, distorting, bending, warping, as though the reflections were becoming something else entirely. I could see the fourth stool in both of them, its emptiness spreading like a sickness, consuming the whole room, until I couldn't tell where I was anymore. Inside the bar or inside the mirror. The girl's sobbing grew frantic now, shaking the very foundation of the bar. It was as though she was no longer alone, that something had joined her, something older, something hungrier. I glanced around, desperate for any sign of escape, but the walls seemed to close in, the windows now dark and opaque, as if I were trapped in the very essence of this nightmare. And then the scratching began again. It wasn't coming from the floor this time. No, it was coming from above. It was as though something was clawing its way down from the ceiling. The sound of claws scraping against wood, against stone, against the very fabric of the room. I looked up, heart hammering in my chest, and saw nothing. There was nothing there, but the sound. It was real, and it was coming closer, closer to me. The thing in the mirror grinned wider. Its smile split into something so grotesque, so inhuman, that it made my stomach churn. And suddenly I understood. It wasn't just waiting for me to break the rules. It was waiting for all of us to break them, to open the door, to invite it in, to let it feast on our souls. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate, too quiet to be real, yet they grew louder with each passing second. I knew, deep down, that the moment I turned around, it would be there, standing behind me, its breath on my neck, its fingers brushing against my skin. But when I turned, there was nothing. The room was empty, except for the fourth stool. The fourth stool had moved. It was closer now, just inches away from where I stood. My eyes went wide in horror as I watched helpless as someone appeared in the stool. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its presence, like a weight pressing on me, suffocating me. It wasn't the man in the trench coat. It wasn't the girl. This was something else entirely. And then I heard the voice again. The voice I had heard so many times, so many whispers, but now it was clear, unmistakable. "Pour the drink," it said, the voice low, almost purring, as though it knew every fear I had ever felt. My heart stopped, and I knew then I had made my choice. The words echoed in my mind, pounding against the walls of my skull like the heavy thud of a distant drumbeat, each one adding weight to the already unbearable tension in the room. The fourth stool, that cursed seat, sat only inches away, but it felt like miles. Every step I took toward it felt like I was walking deeper into a pit, each breath heavier than the last. The presence that had taken root there, that had settled into the very fibers of the bar, was suffocating, its dark energy winding around my chest like a vice. I could feel the pressure mounting, a force beyond my understanding, beyond anything I had ever known before. It was as though the very air had turned thick, filled with the weight of 1,000 unspoken promises, and every breath I drew was like inhaling shards of glass. I glanced around the room, but the faces of the patrons had changed. They were still there, but their eyes were hollow, their expressions frozen in an eternal state of grief and terror, as though they had been trapped here for far longer than I could comprehend. There was no laughter, no chatter, no warmth, only silence. Silence broken by the low hum of the jukebox, still playing that song I knew all too well. The voices around me faded, but the whispers of their misery remained, seeping into the very walls of the bar like the damp chill of an old grave. The figure sitting at the fourth stool had not moved, but I could feel it, like a phantom presence behind me, watching, waiting for me to make the fatal mistake. I could feel its eyes, cold and calculating, like ice against my skin, burning with a hunger I knew would never be satisfied. It was not just any entity. This was something older, something that had waited for centuries to claim its prize. I was its prey. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. The voice that had whispered those chilling words to me, was still in my head, repeating over and over, like a mantra. Pour the drink. The command was simple, but the consequences of following it were unfathomable. And yet, despite the terror coursing through my veins, despite every fiber of my being screaming at me to stop, I felt my body moving of its own accord. My hand reached out, trembling, toward the bottle on the counter, the glass in my other hand. The very act of reaching for the bottle felt like I was sealing my fate, like I was signing a pact with something that would take everything from me, and in return, offer nothing but darkness and despair. My fingers brushed the cool glass of the bottle, and for a brief moment, I thought I heard a soft, mocking laugh, like the sound of wind passing through the branches of a dead tree. It was the sound of inevitability, the sound of a predator closing in on its prey. The room seemed to spin, the shadows stretching and writhing as though they were alive, as though they were trying to reach out and consume me. The bar itself had become an extension of the nightmare, the very walls pulsating with malevolent energy, pushing me closer to the fourth stool, to the thing sitting there, waiting for me to make the mistake that would end it all. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, a rhythmic pounding that matched the rhythm of the jukebox. The song had shifted again, now a slow, mournful dirge that seemed to crawl beneath my skin, worming its way into my soul. I tried to block it out, but it was no use. The song wasn't just in my ears, it was in my bones, in the very marrow of my body. I could feel it pulling me, urging me to follow its melody, to fall into its trap. As I poured the drink, I could feel the air around me grow colder, the chill sinking deep into my bones, freezing my very essence. The glass in my hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, as though the weight of my decision had become too much to bear. But still, my hand moved, and the glass filled with liquid that shimmered with an unnatural light, as though the drink itself had been pulled from the depths of some otherworldly place. I glanced up, my eyes locking onto the figure at the fourth stool, and for the first time I saw it. Not clearly, not completely, but enough to understand that what sat there was not human. It was something far darker, far older than anything I had ever encountered. Its features were blurred, its outline shifting like smoke, but its presence was undeniable. It was watching me with a hunger, a yearning that sent a shiver through my entire being. It wanted the drink. It wanted me to deliver it. And I realized then that I wasn't the one pouring the drink. The room seemed to stretch and warp, the walls groaning, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet, as though the very foundation of the bar was shifting, becoming something else. I was no longer standing in the familiar space I had known so well. No, I was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere darker, somewhere far worse. The bar had become a twisted mockery of itself, its once welcoming atmosphere replaced with the heavy weight of dread, of impending doom. The flickering light above me was barely enough to cut through the darkness that had settled like a thick fog. The figure in the stool began to stir. I could feel its movement, a slow, deliberate shift, as though it was waking from a long slumber, stretching its limbs, preparing for something. And that something was me. It was coming for me, and there was no escape, no way to undo what had been set into motion. The moment I had poured the drink, I had sealed my fate. The air crackled with static, the whispers growing louder, more frantic. The voices that had once been distant now filled the space, drowning out everything else. I could hear them clearly now. They were speaking, chanting, urging me to look at it, to face it. And as I did, I felt my body betray me, my gaze drawn to the thing in the fourth stool, my eyes locking onto its shifting, formless face. It smiled, Not with a mouth, not with lips or teeth, but with something far more terrifying. It smiled with its very presence, with the way it filled the room with its essence, with the way it bent the air around it to its will. I could feel it pulling at me, tugging at the very core of my being, dragging me closer, closer to the bar, closer to the fourth stool, closer to the end. I wanted to run, to scream, to claw at the walls and beg for mercy. But there was no mercy here. There was no escape, only the inevitable conclusion of my choices. The whispers grew louder, now a chorus of voices, each one calling my name, urging me forward, urging me to complete the ritual. And as I stepped toward the fourth stool, the temperature dropped again, colder than it had ever been, colder than I thought was possible. My breath fogged in front of me, and I could feel my heart freezing, each beat more sluggish than the last, as if I were slowly being turned to ice. And then I heard the voice again, the same voice, low and insistent. Pour the drink. I was no longer in control. My body moved on its own, as though it were being controlled by something far beyond my understanding, far beyond any logic I had ever known. The glass in my hand was cold, colder than it had any right to be, sending shockwaves through my arm as if it were made of ice rather than glass. I could feel the trembling in my fingers, but I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop any of it. My feet carried me closer to the fourth stool, each step feeling like it was taking me further into a nightmare from which I would never wake. The whispers intensified, their voices now a cacophony of mocking, cruel laughter that seemed to come from every direction, from every corner of the room. And yet the bar was still deathly quiet, except for the low hum of the jukebox and the unmistakable sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The figure in the fourth stool was still, its presence suffocating, an invisible weight pressing down on me, squeezing the air from my lungs until every breath was a laborious struggle. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its gaze, as though it were boring into me, as though it knew every dark corner of my mind, every secret fear that I had buried deep within myself. The very air around me had turned viscous, thick with a sense of inevitability, of something terrible waiting just beyond my reach. I knew it was waiting for me to pour that drink to seal my fate, and even as my mind screamed for me to stop, my hands continued, reaching forward, the glass gliding toward the figure in the stool with a force I could neither resist nor comprehend. The room felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in, the ceiling pressing down on me, suffocating me with each passing second. The temperature had dropped further still, to a point where I could see my breath misting in the air, the cold biting at my skin, seeping into my very bones. It was the kind of cold that no normal place could ever reach, the kind of cold that seemed to come from the depths of some other world, a place far removed from the warmth and safety of the living. And as I reached the fourth stool, I noticed something, a faint, unnatural glow emanating from the space where the figure sat. It was not light, not warmth, but a kind of blackness that was not quite black, swirling and writhing, like the shadows themselves were alive, breathing, crawling toward me. I stopped just short of the stool, my hand trembling in midair, the glass now inches from the figure. The voice spoke again, low and insistent, vibrating through the very air. Pour the drink. But I didn't want to pour it. I didn't want to do anything that would let this nightmare continue. My mind screamed, my soul screamed, but my hand reached out anyway, compelled, bound by forces far beyond my control. The cold air seemed to thicken, the room twisting, the walls bending as though they were made of rubber, stretching and distorting under the pressure of an unseen force. I could hear the whispers now more clearly than ever. Every voice, every word, every sound layered on top of one another until it became a suffocating tide of noise, pulling me under. Pour the drink, the voice repeated, each word dripping with malice, with an ancient hunger. The glass finally met the edge of the stool. I had done it. I had made the choice. And as the liquid sloshed into the glass, I thought I heard a low, guttural laugh from the figure, a sound that seemed to crawl up my spine, sending a shiver of horror through my body. The very air seemed to vibrate with dark energy, a ripple that spread across the room like a wave, distorting everything it touched. The jukebox, which had been playing that same eerie song, crackled, and for a moment, the world around me seemed to glitch, like the fabric of reality was being pulled apart at the seams. The figure in the stool moved, but it wasn't a natural movement. It was jerky, unnatural, as if the thing inhabiting the stool was trying to mimic human motion, but failed to do so in any recognizable way. It was as if the thing didn't quite understand the mechanics of a body, like it was forcing itself to move, forcing itself to exist within the physical limits of this world. The shadows around it shifted, writhing, stretching, as though they were trying to break free of the boundaries that confined them, as if the space itself was being twisted into something else, something wrong. I stood frozen, the glass still in my hand, my heart hammering in my chest as the figure reached for the drink, its hand moving slowly, deliberately, as though it were savoring every moment. Its fingers, long and skeletal, trembled with anticipation. The moment they touched the glass, the room seemed to contract even further, the pressure building, pressing in on me from all sides. The sound of the jukebox was now a cacophony, the music twisting into something unrecognizable, its notes growing distorted and garbled until they sounded like screams, like tortured wails from the very depths of the earth. My mind was slipping, splintering under the weight of it all. The figure's hand lifted the glass, and as it did, a chill unlike any I had ever known washed over me. Colder than ice, colder than death. My skin felt like it was being pulled tight, stretched over my bones, like it was being scorched and frozen at once. The room shifted again, the walls bending and rippling, as though they were trying to escape from whatever force was suffocating them. And then the figure took a sip. The moment it did, the room erupted into chaos. The lights flickered violently, casting the space into moments of complete darkness before flashing back to life, each flicker more erratic than the last. The shadows grew, swirling around the figure like a storm, converging and expanding, until it seemed as if they were taking on a life of their own. The figure's body began to ripple and distort, as if the very fabric of its existence was being torn apart, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. And then it spoke, but the voice was not the same as before. It was deeper, guttural, a low rumble that shook the very air around me. "You shouldn't have done that." Before I could react, the world around me seemed to explode into madness. The shadows surged toward me, dark tendrils that reached out to drag me into their abyss, into whatever realm lay beyond the bar, beyond this world. The air itself seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, vibrating with the force of 1,000 unearthly voices, all screaming in unison, a sound so horrific that it made my ears ring, my mind twist in agony. I tried to move, to run, but my body refused to obey. My legs were rooted to the floor, frozen by the sheer weight of the darkness closing in. The figure was no longer human. It was something far worse, something ancient, something that had been waiting for this moment, for me to make this choice. And now it was taking what it had come for, my soul. As I stood there, helpless, surrounded by the consuming darkness, I realized that there was no escape, no turning back. I had crossed the point of no return. The bar had changed, the air had changed, and I had changed. I was no longer just a part of this place. I was becoming something else, something bound to the horrors that lingered just beneath the surface of the world, something that would never see the light of day again. And then the final words echoed through the room, the voice now a dark, mocking whisper, dripping with triumph. "You've poured your soul, and now you belong to me." The darkness closed in. The world collapsed around me, and I was plunged into a suffocating void, the shadows twisting and pulling at my limbs, wrapping around me like chains of ice. I tried to scream, but my mouth was dry, my voice lost in the oppressive silence that filled the air. Every inch of space seemed to be pulsing with a malevolent energy, vibrating, humming with an otherworldly force that felt as though it was slowly pulling me apart. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I could only feel, only sense the overwhelming presence of something ancient and terrible that was closing in around me, tightening its grip on my soul. I could hear the voice again, but this time it was not a whisper. It was a roar, a guttural, echoing sound that reverberated through the very marrow of my bones, shaking me to the core. "You belong to me," it said, the words laced with a cruel finality, as though there was no way out, no escape from the hell I had willingly walked into. The figure, no, the thing, was no longer a mere silhouette. It was a shape, an outline of dark energy that moved with an unnatural grace, its form shifting, growing, twisting in ways that defied logic and reason. It was like watching something being pulled from another dimension, something that didn't belong here, in this world of light and life. The air grew colder still, and I could feel the life draining from me. My energy, my strength, my very will to resist being siphoned away, consumed by the shadows. I stumbled backward, but my legs were weak, unresponsive. It was as though the darkness had taken hold of my body, and I couldn't escape, couldn't move away from the very thing that now claimed me. The walls of the bar had melted away, dissolving into the endless, swirling void. The lights flickered and died, plunging me into a deeper kind of darkness, the kind where I couldn't even trust the sound of my own breath. The silence was deafening, oppressive, as though the world had been swallowed whole by something that existed beyond time, beyond space, beyond understanding. I turned, desperate, hoping against hope that I could find some shred of the world I had known. But there was nothing. The bar was gone. The stools, the counter, the mirrors, everything I had once known was gone, replaced by a vast inky blackness that stretched endlessly in every direction. And then, through the darkness, I saw something. A faint, flickering light, too far to reach, too dim to comfort, but there nonetheless. I moved toward it, hoping it would guide me, hoping it would lead me out of this nightmare. But as I took each step, the light seemed to retreat further, as though it were just out of reach, teasing me, mocking me. "You'll never leave," the voice came again, louder this time, more insistent. It was coming from everywhere, from within me, around me, the very air itself. "You've poured your soul, and now you will remain forever." I stopped, frozen in place. My heart was pounding, my breath shallow, but there was nothing I could do. I was trapped, and the figure was still there, somewhere, watching, waiting. I could feel its presence, that dark weight, pressing in on me from every side, filling the space with its suffocating embrace. And then the ground beneath me began to shift. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like the first tremors of an earthquake. But as the shaking grew more intense, I realized with horror that I was no longer standing on solid ground. The floor beneath me was dissolving, disintegrating into dust, into nothing. I was falling, plummeting downward into an abyss that seemed to stretch on forever, an endless spiral of darkness. The walls around me spun and twisted as if reality itself were unraveling, collapsing inward, collapsing on top of me, trying to swallow me whole. I tried to scream again, but no sound escaped my lips. I felt weightless, as if I were floating, but not in the peaceful, dreamlike way I had once experienced in the deepest sleep. No, this was different. This was a terrifying kind of weightlessness, as though I were suspended in the void, between life and death, between two worlds that should never have crossed paths. The sensation of falling intensified, each second stretching out like an eternity, and I realized that I wasn't just falling through the physical world. I was falling through time, through my own life, through everything I had ever known. Memories flashed before my eyes, flashes of the bar, of the faces that had sat in the stools, of the people I had served. Faces that now felt like distant, unimportant ghosts, like echoes of something that had never truly mattered. The figure's voice roared once more, its words a guttural growl that vibrated through the very core of my being, each syllable sending shudders through my soul. "You are mine now. You belong to me." The darkness around me thickened, pressing in tighter, suffocating me with each passing second. I could feel the weight of it, like the pressure of 1,000 hands, pushing me deeper and deeper into the blackness, into the nothingness. And then, just as I thought I would be consumed completely, I felt something, a flicker, a spark, a tiny thread of light in the overwhelming darkness. It was so faint at first that I doubted my own senses, but as I focused on it, the light grew, slowly but steadily, until it began to illuminate the space around me. But this wasn't the warm, comforting glow of hope that I had imagined. No, this light was cold, harsh, blinding, as though it were cutting through the darkness like a blade, a weapon forged from the very fabric of the void itself. The darkness recoiled, and for a moment, there was silence. But then I heard something else. A soft, familiar sound, like the clinking of glass against wood, the sound of a glass being placed on the bar, the sound I had heard so many times before. It was a sound that had once been comforting, once had been a part of my routine. But now, in this hellish place, it felt like the final confirmation of my fate. I turned, desperately searching for the source of the sound, and through the blackness, I saw it. The fourth stool, sitting empty, as it always had been. Except this time, there was no shadow, no figure lurking within it. Just emptiness. An emptiness that felt more suffocating than anything I had ever known. An emptiness that stretched on forever, like a void waiting to consume me whole. And then, as I stared into that abyss, I understood. I understood that this wasn't just a place, a bar, a nightmare. This was my new reality, my new prison, and I would never escape. I had become part of the darkness. The bar was no more, I was no more. And the only thing that remained was the eternal suffocating silence. But it wasn't truly silent. Not really. I could feel it, deep within the very marrow of my bones. A presence, something watching, something waiting. A terrible awareness that lingered just beyond the edge of my consciousness. I had become part of the emptiness, a mere shadow lost in the depths of this place, this void. The darkness pressed against me, not physically, but with a weight that crushed my spirit, that suffocated my very will to resist, to fight back. I was not dead, but I was no longer alive. I was somewhere between, caught in the never-ending abyss, trapped in the same space where the rules no longer applied, where reality itself had bent and broken. Time no longer had meaning here, nor did anything else. The bar, the people, the rituals, they were all nothing but distant memories, echoes of a life I could barely remember. Was I ever really part of the world outside this place? Was it all just a dream, a sickening illusion that had turned into something far more horrific? The questions twisted in my mind, but there were no answers. There was nothing, just the crushing silence and the suffocating weight of the darkness. I felt something stir in the distance, a small movement, a slight shift in the void. My breath caught in my throat as I waited, straining to hear or see something, anything, that might break this endless, oppressive quiet. The emptiness seemed to ripple, as though something far beneath the surface was awakening. Something ancient, something that had been lying dormant until now. The air, if you could even call it air, thickened, grew colder, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw a shape. A figure, a faint outline in the dark, just at the edge of my vision. But when I turned toward it, it was gone, vanishing back into the endless expanse of shadow. Then, the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open echoed through the void, a sound that, in this silence, felt like the roar of a storm. I froze, every muscle in my body locking in place. It was the front door, the one I had heard so many times before, the door that led into the bar. But now there was no bar, no patrons, no comforting sounds of clinking glasses and soft chatter, just the door, standing alone in the dark. Slowly, impossibly, it swung open. A figure stepped through the door. Tall, impossibly tall, shrouded in a long, flowing black cloak, the edges of which seemed to dissipate into the darkness like smoke. A wide-brimmed hat obscured their face, casting them in shadow, but even from where I stood, or perhaps where I floated, I could feel the temperature drop, the icy chill that always accompanied this figure's arrival. My heart raced, but I couldn't move. My limbs were like stone, heavy, unresponsive. The figure stepped forward, its presence filling the space with a sense of foreboding, an aura of death that lingered in the air. I could not look at its face, and I could not speak. I remembered the rules, the unspoken laws of this place. The figure, whoever or whatever it was, had come for me. And yet, I couldn't tear my eyes away, not out of curiosity, but because something in me knew that if I dared to look, if I dared to acknowledge the face beneath the hat, my fate would be sealed forever. So I did not look, but I felt the weight of its gaze, like two burning embers boring into the back of my skull, and I knew that it knew I was there. It had always known. The figure stopped just before me, too close for comfort, though I could not move to back away. Its hand, if you could call it a hand, extended slowly, deliberately, fingers long and twisted, not human at all. It reached out, and I could feel the darkness coiling around my own limbs, holding me in place. It took my wrist with an unnatural grip, cold and unyielding, and I felt a surge of something terrible run through me, a pulse of dark energy that seemed to bleed into my very soul. I was frozen, unable to scream, unable to fight, unable to do anything but feel. "You should have never poured the drink," the voice of the figure came, low, resonant, almost like a chant. "Now, you will join the rest of us. You will be part of this place forever, just like the others, just like them." I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight, but I couldn't. It wasn't fear that held me still. No, it was something worse. A numbness that seeped into my very being, a coldness that spread through my veins like poison, paralyzing me, making me forget how to even struggle. The figure's grip tightened, and I could feel it pulling me toward the door, toward the void that stood beyond it. And as I was dragged closer, I saw them, the others, the lost souls of the bar. They were all there, but they weren't the people I remembered. They were twisted, distorted versions of themselves, their faces hollow and eyes wide, staring out from the shadows with vacant, unblinking stares. Some of them were frozen in place, trapped in the same endless loop that had once been my reality. Others seemed to be moving, but not like normal people. They moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, like puppets controlled by invisible strings, dragging their feet, dragging their souls behind them. They were all here, all the souls that had been claimed by this place, this darkness. And now, I was one of them. I could hear the whispers, the constant murmurs of the lost, their voices overlapping, blending together into an unintelligible cacophony of misery and despair. They were trapped here, just as I was. They were lost, their souls forever bound to the void, doomed to wander in this dark, suffocating prison, never able to escape. And now, I was joining them. I was becoming just another whisper in the dark, just another soul claimed by the bar. The figure pushed me through the door, and I felt the coldness seep into my very bones. It wasn't like the cold I had known before, the cold that came from the temperature dropping. No, this was a deep internal cold. A cold that came from knowing, deep in my soul, that I would never leave, that I would never escape this place. I was now a part of it, as much as the shadows, as much as the whispers. I had been consumed, swallowed whole by the darkness. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that made my heart stop. I was lost, completely lost. And the only thing that remained was the eternal, suffocating silence and the whispers of those who had gone before me, forever echoing in the endless void, a warning to anyone foolish enough to make the same mistake.